Okay, so let me describe the acoustic software. This acoustic software activity is being donated by IBM to the Enterprise Neurosystem Group as part of IBM's attempts to make and further the progress of open source collaborative AI solutions. What I'll do is like to give a brief history of how acoustic started. It started out initially, I would say 3 or 4 years ago, when we had a lot of focus of Watson IoT and try to build solutions for our enterprise customers, primarily focusing on Industry 4.0 industry solution space. And one of the observations that was made at that time was that there's a lot of information that one can get from ambient sounds in an environment. So it started out by people observing that when mechanics go into their engine rooms in buildings, like no, and they want to know, okay, is something right or wrong? They basically can hear and something sounds off, something sounds different when things are wrong. When we talk to the folks on the cruise ship operators, or the engine operators in jet planes, they all said that, hey, if the best way we know that something is wrong is that things start to sound different. And by the sound, we can identify. So I said, hey, if that's the case, can't we make synthetic ears and for the human beings? Synthetic ears that will monitor all the time the sounds. And these synthetic ears would basically will be installed into locations where, I mean, like if it's loud or noisy or difficult to hear, then it's easier to have a machine there be listening and looking for things like abnormal sounds or look for sounds of different types and inference that can be made from that. So it was received well by the IBM business units, and they said, okay, let's go ahead and build it. So we started building that activity. The system was first built. It was initially offered for some time as a product by the Watson IoT folks. The one challenge, of course, is that it was not, I mean, the sounds uh, wasn't quite as immediately hitting the problems in the business space, right? So the system then went to consulting, and consulting again had quite a few uptake. There was a lot of interest, a lot of customers signed up for it. It was deployed and piloted into multiple things. But the end conclusion from the consulting was that, okay, for these type of capabilities, it's better if IBM lets it out in the open source. And it is better for that out in the open source because using it, applying it to many different application use cases, etc., is something that is done best in the open source community. The rational logic goes like this, that there is a basic software code which is stable, which is designed using the software engineering practices and principles, and which can apply AI and ML to the sounds. But the real value of applications comes from collecting the sounds, analyzing them, processing them, and it's better if the whole community does at the open source. So IBM has decided to release it into the open source. We have gotten the no objection certificate from consulting and the business units, and from the senior leadership that's doing that. The process of releasing the open source should complete by end of this month. And I think the team that is releasing the software will be on April 1st, like the end of the month, General Enterprise Neurosystem call to give a detailed, in-depth overview of the acoustic software that will be in open source and the different use cases. Bill, if I've gotten the date wrong or something, just correct me. Okay.
So everything's correct. Oh, John, you want to go ahead and then I can explain how it fits in as well.
Oh, okay, well, Bill, I was going to do the same thing. Why don't you jump in,
No,
Bill?
go right ahead, John.
Okay.
Go for it.
Okay, so I want to toot like what we're really accomplishing, right? Because this isn't what typical open source, I'm saying this for some of the new people, this isn't typical open source. You know, you've got 18 to 25-year-olds that have no experience and they need some guidance. This is people wanting to be, frankly, you know, I'm trying to not use, now that we're being recorded, the language, some kind of kicker, okay? People wanting to actually go make stuff happen. And why would IBM pick Enterprise Neurosystems? It's exactly the charter, and Bill Wright deserves a great deal of credit on this. It's exactly the charter that we're not trying to focus a simple industry solution. We're not focusing on what we're looking at the collaboration of what could become a global perspective on how to bring together diverse interests toward uncompromising goals and views, right? And that sounds so simple and ideologically Pollyannish, but it's actually true and it's actually working. We have people from every major company involved in this. We have code that is production code, and we have people coming up with use cases like, why don't we have a problem with privacy if we go into healthcare? Why don't we go with bees, right? I mean, that's the value you get when you don't have a commercially focused interest group, right? Ryan's not on this, I don't think. Ryan comes from the Slack. We're doing particle physics with Ryan on the government space. He's brought us in and created opportunities in government that we wouldn't get if we were just a commercial institution. This model, I would like to argue, if for the people, is we're trying to not do what is considered traditional open source. I would say it's kind of principled, enlightened open source. I've done some of this stuff in my career for a couple of decades, but the difference is we now have things are coming at us, and we've just got started. 1 month ago, we've solidified a charter. In less than 1 month, we're now getting donated code from IBM that's production quality. We have a dozen or so people from IBM, the Academy. We have 3 or 4 use cases and a bead on core technology that will go to the middle of AI ML infrastructure that could lead toward Bill's, quote, a business singularity concept. Like, that's a month of this, and it's the power when you have real diversity toward focused outcome. And Bill, I'm sorry, I just, I never try to hit your beat, your drum, but it's cool stuff.
Yeah. I mean, Bill, do you want to say a few more words about the bill, about the bill use case? Because that's, as John said, that I would have never imagined of that thing until until this group took over and said, "Hey, let's monitor bees."
Well, and just think of how cool the marketing on that will be if we can get a real result on that in 6 months to 9 months. Okay. What do we do? Oh, we just solved a problem, or we have identified things that you couldn't understand about a problem. And why? Because we had a bunch of volunteers with perspective. It's awesome. Bill,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
oh yeah, I can, and for the folks that are new, I'll spend just 2 minutes explaining the background. I'd say about 10 years ago, I wrote a white paper. I was at a virtualization company in Palo Alto, let's say. And I was to the CTO of the company, and it was explaining how mobile networks could eventually become a neurosystem for the planet, and also that the federation of these neurosystems over time could lead to some form of a global network that could help monitor planetary changes, and that would be earthquakes, disaster mitigation, climate change, all the different areas. And at the time, they just figured I'd spent too much time looking at blacklight posters. I think they wondered what was going on. But what was interesting about that was it was well received by Steve Herod, and we've stayed in touch and become friends since. But what was neat about it is it really got me thinking about where the future of this all was going to head. And when I saw the advent of artificial intelligence and had worked on virtualizing and doing research and development on BI, business intelligence workloads at VMware also, it became clear that all these different elements were beginning to condense into a single architecture over time. So it led to the neurosystem concept. It's just built on all the other stuff that everybody else has done in this group. Dinesh has worked on, biosystems and networking and wrote a book about it. I mean, everybody here has a common interest in kind of a basic understanding that we all share. And so the idea now is to take it forward and look for use cases that could be part of this larger network effect. And if you think about the bee populations around the world that are declining right now, and what a dramatic impact that will have on human food sourcing, I mean, and the kinds of technologies that'll have to be created to replace that if it goes awry, this becomes a really critical need in terms of the planetary ecosystem. And so it was really interesting. Ryan at Stanford was, he's a beekeeper. I don't know if anybody's aware, but he has 3 beehives in his backyard, as well as being a noted physicist and AI engineer. And it's funny because this was brought up and he just leaped right on it. He was like, oh my gosh, there are acoustics that potentially could indicate a hive in trouble or experiencing disease or some form of decline. And acoustics could be a very interesting way of doing that.
Yeah.
And if you could span that out at a meta level to millions of beehives at some point, and that's that's an interesting logistics challenge, but there are ways to pull it off.
I mean, there may even be like language, language implications of this, right?
Yes.
Totally. Insects operate from a different, from a global, from a global psychology as a group, a collective, right? I mean, nobody's ever thought about stuff like that.
And just look at YouTube videos of those French bulldogs who try to talk. I mean, it's hilarious when you look at this. There are all these different language forms that all the species communicate with, and they've found that in multiple species. And so, but we're definitely not alone. And I think if we can find a way to help these populations, we help humanity and we help the planet as a result. So it just becomes a microcosm, I think, of the charter, which is fascinating.
Okay, Dinesh, we've preached we've been your choir. Okay, thank you for helping IBM donate this.
No, this is great. Like, no, although now pulling back, the acoustics in my mind was a separate working group. So I want to pull it back because, of course, like, no, I'm more than happy to, like, no, since it's a common group, we don't have to follow strict things. But I want to then pull our attention back, saying that, okay, acoustics is a great thing that's being done. Let me go through a status update of this particular group. And the group is, we are looking at trying to create common utilities. And given that we don't have Josh others, let me just give a quick update on where we are with the first utility. And I think the best use of the time with this group here probably would be on brainstorming about the second utility that we ought to be creating. The first utility, thanks to Josh and his team members, seems to be progressing along quite well. So the first utility is a catalog of self-describing assets. And the concept of self-describing digital assets comes from the fact that we have, like, no, essentially, when you look at the AI models, AI data, the problem that we encounter is that a huge kind of heterogeneity in all those models and data. And when you have that type of heterogeneity, it's very hard to lay out that, okay, here is the common way to publish it, here is a common way to subscribe it, here's a common way to distribute it. So we felt that if we could create a system, a catalog, which basically allow you to keep the asset, which also contains the metadata describing it, that system could be very useful to create various type of distributed AI-based solutions. And so we have working towards creating a catalog, which will have both allow one to have a data and a metadata pointer. Josh and the team of AOT volunteers, and I thank, because some of those volunteers are here, David, Matthew, Shirley, Andy, right, have been working towards that and making certain architectural decisions. So right now, one of the decisions that we have reached is that we are going to create the catalog so that it will interoperate with an external database. We would create the backend in Python, Flask, and Mongo, PyMongo, so that the actual data as well as the scalable entries are stored in an external Mongo database. We would support user-level authentication. And the basic concept of user-level authentication is to create something for the longer term where different users would have different roles. The user authentication information is going to be, again, created locally, because you don't want to have too much dependency. And then we want to at least support the initial use case where we distribute, say, a typical use case could be someone learning from the core of a cloud service provider, say an AI model or an acoustic model, using the catalog to distribute it to multiple different instances of inference engines that could be running at different, say, based out of a cell station or at other sites. So that would be the initial thing. The front end for the system would be in JavaScript. Josh is an expert in JavaScript. The backend system, it will be done in Python. And I can go into more details of things if people have interest. But let me wait here to see if there are any questions or comments from anyone.
No, it's good. I mean, it's good. It's solid.
So that's great. So I think, so if, like, of course, we'll have a more updated one report on both from Satya, and Josh will probably both be joining next week. So we'll get a more detailed update on the status at that time. Since we have a concurrent goal in 6 months to try to identify the second utility, I thought it may be worthwhile just to have initial brainstorming and see what are the next second utility that we may need for a distributed AI-based solution. the goal, just to remind, is that we want to avoid duplicating work that's going on in other open source communities. So we don't want to sort of create a competition to TensorFlow or a competition to to another AI-based scikit-learn or PyTorch or other things. I mean, if we can add something to augment them and increase onto them, we want to do that. But we would rather not create a replica. We would avoid redundant efforts, because we can always say that, okay, if you want to use the certain type of, you want to train some type of very large language model, okay, just go and reuse BERT, as opposed to saying we are in competition with BERT or something. So we don't want to duplicate the work, but gaps that are people need in creating distributed enterprise applications, those are the things that we would that would make sense for us to create as a common utility. And there are quite a few things of this type. So I just wanted to open the discussion up and see what people feel could be possible possible ideas or possible things that could be the second utility. And it need not be something earth-shattering. Like when we started with catalog, it took us a few months to come with the idea of a catalog. And initially it may sound, oh, this is just a catalog. But a catalog of self-describing assets, when we look at the different use cases and things, can do some really amazing things. So we want to find the second utility like that between now and, say, approximately 6 months from now. So does anyone have a thought or idea as to what could be a possible second utility?
I have a question with regard to this utility right now. For example, from what I'm understanding, you're storing, or I mean, having the models there. Does that include the versioning and sharing capability across the models? Or will that be considered a different utility?
The versioning and sharing, okay. So the what you store in the model is the model and the metadata about the model. And because you have the metadata, in the metadata, you can include a version number, and that will allow you to then have the versioning capability to create and pull the right model or the latest version of things which matches certain amount of metadata information from there. So that's the basic idea. So if somebody needs a versioning capability, they can put that versioning capability in the metadata and search of that. On the other hand, if there's somebody who says, hey, I don't really care about the version capability, they need not use it. It's optional.
Yeah, William, do you go by William or Bill? What do you prefer?
William. Otherwise,
Okay.
Bill will.
Yeah, so no, it's all good. It's all good. I just want to make sure I'm not calling you "Hey you." But your idea is provoking me to think. Is what about versioning for data sets as a project, right? I mean, think about it. I've got 17,000 gazillion snapshots of data. Let's just use the Bs, okay? And I want to do something for longitudinal studies. Wouldn't I want to know the versioning of the data?
Yeah.
Right. It's not high. It's not high complexity. I don't know if we have people who are familiar with that, right? It's different. I mean, there are obvious questions like, do you want to do diffs for, capacity storing? Do you want to do you want to have geolocation assigned to the? I mean, there's a class of things that could be assigned to that. I just don't know if we have anybody in our community that has done some research, or if Bill writes Mr. Magic about finding, connecting people, or the other Red Hat folks, you all network like crazy fiends. I mean, is there somebody who's spending time on that research that might want to join this community? Or does somebody in the community already have some experience with that? That would be another straw person that I'm throwing out to the community. Thoughts?
Data versions. I think,
I mean, one's going to hurt my feelings if they think it's stupid. I mean, I'm trying to toss ideas out there in the same spirit.
That's a nice idea. Basically, essentially, if you've got data, I mean, is there fundamentally a difference between versions of data and versions of model? That's the question. Michael has raised his hand. Michael, do you want to comment something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so I mean, there is already an open source tool that addresses this problem called DVC that's used for data versioning. So if we're trying to avoid competing with things, then there is already a solution for, or at least a project for data versioning that exists that's pretty well accepted.
Cool.
That was your, I mean, yeah, that's the point I was going to make. Maybe it's more about integrating DVC with what we're currently doing than trying to create a new utility from scratch.
We should never be duplicating work, right? That is for sure, right?
Exactly.
Can you say a few more description of what DVC is? I'm all for everything. We shouldn't be duplicating, but can you just describe just briefly what DVC is, what it does, or maybe if you have access to a link or somewhere people can learn more, it may be worthwhile posting it. It may be of interest to folks.
Yeah, it would be great if we could take a look at that, if you could give us a URL.
Yeah, I just posted it in chat. I mean, essentially, the pitch is it's Git for your data sets, specifically for machine learning.
Okay.
But
I'm glad that my creative idea wasn't so insane that nobody ever thought of it.
Yes.
Obviously, right? Obviously, I'm being sarcastic.
I'll admit I'm not a power user or even have that much experience with this particular tool, but I just wanted to mention.
Well, we should totally look at that, right? If we think this is an idea worth pursuing, which what made me think of that was William's comment, right? So I tossed it out, right? I'm not stuck to it by any means.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea, and and I think because we all know that a hard challenge with AI is the data and its data quality and data versions and managing and maintenance of that data. So if we can have a common utility that addresses certain aspects of it, which will be worthwhile. I think the other thought that was generated by these interactions and discussion with Sony, which I just wanted to toss in there, was
That's a great idea,
to create synthetic data, because in a lot of cases, like say for acoustic, we have to create the data for the we have to collect data for the beehives, and there are a lot of other cases in which data needs to be generated, data needs to be data. I mean, like either you have very small amount of data and you need to use it, but then you need to people are coming with schemes so that if you got a small snapshot of a data, then you can train something and then generate more data, which is all representative, including use of GANs or other type of generative models. So one of the other thoughts, and I don't know how much existing open source there is out there, which again needs to be, but I'm just thinking out that maybe if we have a utility which says, okay, here is a small sample set. I collected 2 hours worth of data because that's what I can do. And then something learns a model of it and essentially generates from that 2 hour worth of data, something which will be more like collecting data for 200 hours or other things with various variations and other type of nuances that would be coming from that data. So perhaps a system that can expand small data sets into much larger data sets that can capture or give a more enriched learning experience. That might be utility that might be useful. Again, I'm just thinking it out loud.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not listening carefully, Dinesh, because I'm looking at DVC right now. So I'm going to try to get to be dumb at it so I can ask some questions, right? Not smart at it yet, but just to go back to you, Michael, while we're still live and we have a chance. Okay. Others ideas about the Sony stuff? Other folks? Okay. Can I ask a question just for a second about DVC? It looks like this is this an open source project that is supported by a commercial enterprise, the iterative.ai? Is that the idea? It was Michael, I believe.
Yeah, so I'm not 100% sure about how the ownership of it, but yes, it's essentially, that's what it appears to be to me, an open source project that iterative AI is
the driver.
So yeah, it looks like maybe they have
Are you, hey Michael, are you, do you prefer to be a lurker or a joiner? I'm trying not to sign you up for something, but it looks like it's a provocative idea, and I'm wondering if you'd like to join up, that maybe we could have you dig in and, give us, like at the next meeting, some sense of this. I'm not trying to commit you. I'm not trying to, don't feel pressured. I don't mean it that way.
Currently, yeah, I don't necessarily know if I have the personal bandwidth to take this on at the moment, but
okay, that's cool. That's cool. Then we'll just keep it. We'll just keep it, live here until we can find somebody. Yeah, it looks interesting, right? It looks to me, when I look at DVC, it looks like it's a source control approach for both model and data, rather than either or. And I can't tell, some of the specifics of it, except that it's GitHub and so forth, which is cool. So yeah, it looks interesting, Michael. Thank you for bringing that to our attention.
yeah, of course.
Okay. Dinesh, sorry, back to you. I was just throwing some noise. I think the idea of synthetic data is also inevitable. My concern on the synthetic data is you got to know so much damn stuff before you can throw your lot in. And I don't know how to genericize it. Bill, right, you found some folks at Berkeley that were working on this early on, and it might be worth trying to bring them in, because this is inevitable, right? I mean, this is inevitable.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think we should talk to Joachim Romfeld. He teaches data sciences at Berkeley. I used to report to him at VMware. Really a good friend at this point. Happy to bring him into that conversation. Also, the DataX folks. I've been involved with that organization off and on for a couple of years. The head of that, the chair of that organization just left and went to the University of Madrid on assignment for a couple of years. I can reach out to them and see if I can re-engage. But Elias, who is a part of the Neurosystem
That's
group,
the person.
Elias used to be head of all the courses that were basically conceived within that organization. So he was basically organizing those and editing those for all the different students. He's now at Microsoft Azure. We just spoke on Friday. He's definitely staying involved with the Neurosystem. What I can do is I can reach out to him and use his contacts to get back in touch with that organization and get that kind of assistance. But Elias is happy to help. He's
I remember talking to him. He's first rate too.
He's a significantly talented AI engineer. So yeah, I'd be glad to get him on the line and have him talk to us next Monday.
Yeah. Hey, William, it looks like you posted something about mostly AI. Yeah, I'm a bit familiar with, but I think that they're proprietary, right? Is that right or wrong?
Yeah, they're a proprietary thing. Yeah.
Right, which will, present a challenge. But they have been addressing exactly. You're totally right. They've been addressing kind of the generic approach for synthetic data modeling.
What I'm thinking is the features or capabilities there maybe are a good seed to.
It's a beautiful
see,
idea.
like, what type of capabilities should be trying to tackle this?
Beautiful idea.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea. And we should probably, before we actually start taking something on, we have to do a lot of background research to see that we're not duplicating something and that we are adding some differentiation and value. So, but I think we have a couple of, that's maybe a possibility. And I think Michael had put in the chat something else about data labeling utilities. So Michael, you want to share a bit more on what would be the appropriate data labeling utilities?
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know the exact implementation, but I just know one of the big, challenges, I think, today, especially for large data sets, like enterprise tier applications, is actually getting good quality labeled data. And that can be difficult. And to have some kind of system in place by which we are, making the labeling of the data simpler, I think would be a really useful utility, because if it's just it's something that everyone has to do, and they shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel each time, that they need to figure out how to get their data labeled. Like bees, for example, it's probably pretty expensive to get what's called bee experts to label the data. It's not like it can just be done by a Mechanical Turk or some other kind of service like that. I think there's a company called Snorkel AI that does some kind of programmatic labeling type of utility, but that again is, I think, a proprietary service. So looking at something in that kind of domain might be a good use of this group's efforts.
Yeah, Michael, that's a great idea. And one of the other adjuncts to this platform that Dinesh had proposed was also digital asset identification and also different kinds of resource identification. So it really would be something that would lie on top of let's say, for example, a container platform. It would assist and kind of enable an ecosphere of AI applications to basically move around, self-identify, find resources, find assets, et cetera. So really to create a dynamic environment. And Dinesh, please correct me if I'm misstating what your objective was. But I think what Michael's calling out is a really important element of that. I mean, to say the least.
Yep. No, data labeling utility can be really useful. And again, the question would be, we really need to look at what else is out there. And I think dynamic, something that can arrange, that again, Bill, you bring out a good point that one useful utility there would be that when we run an AI enablement, especially if we do long-term inference or even some long-range learning, any type of container infrastructure you set up at one time is not going to be the best if the context changes. So if you can use some AI itself to manage, manipulate, be more flexible with how container or the configuration of a solution should be optimized or remodified when things change, that in itself would be a useful utility too. So perhaps we can add that to the mix too.
Has anybody been tracking all of the creative ideas that we're throwing out as topics? Because I think we should just have a running list. And, I'd like to wait till Josh gets back in game next week and some of the other IBMers from the Academy. Because this is the kind of stuff that if we got somebody to dig in, I just looked at a couple of these, quickly. And it's Kirsche, I mean, these are good creative ideas. We need to dive in, actually, specify and, look at them technically.
Yeah, I think creating an architectural diagram at some point would help us slot those in and just kind of act as I guess, a source of truth for all this stuff. So yeah, and it's germinating. That's the thing. We're in midstream, and this is, of course, Dinesh's work stream. But I think once we start actually putting a drawing together, I think that'll make it easy for everybody to understand.
That is those.
Okay, so we see your screen. Yeah, it's a good idea.
Need for data sets. I know that we found something but I'm just putting it just for completeness.
Yep.
There was the second was synthetic. Right? And there was one.
When you're writing this stuff down, I just have a quick question, I think, for just kind of general clarity, maybe. So a lot of these things sound to me like very cool ideas that would be part of like a overarching data science development platform. Part of the stuff that we've been working on in Red Hat's like Office of the CTO is this tool called Open Data Hub, which is essentially a platform for doing data science in the cloud. And it doesn't necessarily have all of these tools as part of it at the moment, but it's certainly something that it would have. Is Open Data Hub been something that's been like looked at or evaluated by this group as kind of the base on which you will build these utilities?
We definitely can explore that in the sense that when we build a utility, that utility needs to be made available to the people. And if the Open Data Hub is the right place to make the utility available, why not? Right? I think the assumption we have is that if there are utilities already underway in Open Data Hub, we don't want to replicate that. But to the extent that we can collaborate with Open Data Hub or any other open source initiative to basically get a scaling multiplying effect, we should do that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure y'all were.
Yeah, no, we are wild supporters for Red Hat, and to the degree that we can all benefit from the vigorous collaboration with Red Hat specific. I mean, Cove, we've bet a lot on Red Hat, so we're totally down with that.
Yeah. Sorry for cutting in, John, but
Yeah.
I was just saying that, Bill, maybe in that spirit, perhaps in one of the general meetings, you can ask the Open Data Hub folks to give an overview of Open Data Hub to the entire community, what it has, what it offers, what its benefits are, so that people are aware.
It's a lot easier than us assigning somebody to go research it, for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I know Steve has been invited to the meetings, et cetera. He's also one of the busiest people in show business, as they say. I'm glad to get him to show up, or Sherrard to give an overview of the Open Data Hub. I'd mentioned it a long time ago, and at the time, it seemed clear that what we needed was something more platform specific as far as a production environment, and something that would be, I guess you could say, a model management system in many respects, incorporating something like a container infrastructure, not a development environment per se. And Open Data Hub was more focused on the development aspects. But I think now Open Data Hub has matured in a really interesting way, and it makes absolute sense to bring them in and see where we could mix and match components wherever it makes sense, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. I think that's really important.
I mean, the key difference in most open source communities that I've or initiatives that I've ever been involved in is we're starting with a kind of maturity that you don't often get. We have people who are extremely seasoned that are involved. So the stuff that we do needs to be advancing their ability to produce. And anything that advances that, we should be using as aggressively as possible. End of story, right? But the goal is we spent a year and a half, and I really I want to make sure that I'm far from taking credit for this, because it's just not right. The Red Hat people did it. They built a community of people that allowed us to start addressing these kinds of things. This is now the year, and Dinesh and I are talking, fairly frequently about doing tactical stuff, right? Everything that we bring in shouldn't be philosophical and theoretical at this point. It should be, does this tactically, and to the degree that the community agrees that this is my projection into the community, everything we need to be doing should be, does this advance tactical objectives? Like the bees as a use case is a perfect illustration. We knew acoustics. We said to the community, what could we do that avoids these problems? Shazam, we've got this bee idea, right? And this should, I would propose that, again, this is subject to the community. I would propose that this become a template of how we integrate all new things. And do other folks have ideas, or does that make sense or not make sense?
It does make sense. I think one thing I'll say is that we are approaching the top of the hour.
Oh, yeah.
So here's my suggestion. We had some good discussion, but definitely not the last. I'm going to put this up in the minutes notes, what the ideas we have. But I would request everybody to keep on thinking about other ideas, other things. And then when we have the meeting next Monday, we can, of course, getting an update on the first utility development from Josh and Satya and others. We would also have more brainstorming about new ideas and new things. Right? So, no, I don't want to run this meeting beyond the allocated time. I know we will have.
Anybody have any other kind of comments or thoughts? Because we're kind of at a good segue. Dinesh, your meeting.
Yeah, I think, okay, I guess this is the last call for the adding any more ideas to these set. Otherwise, okay, we'll keep these as the initial set of ideas, and let's keep on brainstorming.
Thanks for the contributions, everybody.
Thanks for helping. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Okay.
All right, thanks.
Interesting stuff. Thanks.